Okay, so just to talk about initially around our Microsoft MVP and what it means to be recognised. So being an MVP means that I'm recognised by Microsoft for my knowledge, as well as my recognition for giving back to the technical community. So I do that by my co-hosting of the Let's Talk Azure podcast. So doing that outside of work and giving back to the community. Another part of that is also helping give feedback to Microsoft technology through the private preview community. So helping shape those features and new services for customers. So let's go on. So what has ITC seen in the wild around the cloud environments? We've seen organizations build rapidly within those cloud environments and necessarily not looking at the posture or the security elements of it. So they're just, in effect, building product to increase their revenue, but maybe, security taking a slight, back step to, that deployment. We're seeing a lack of environments being documented, being able to see how large, an environment is, as well as legacy infrastructure being deployed in cloud environments, not being used, being out of date because new services have been deployed and implemented. And then finally, we've seen multiple clouds being used and multiple development teams. So where where microservices are being built and different technology and different product development teams are being used, it's being separated, maybe not centralized, seen. So how do we find these blind spots within these environments? So using Microsoft Defender for Cloud, we can do cloud security posture management. So we can start getting visibility of all of those environments and seeing where misconfiguration, threats, and risks are in those environments. We can then benchmark against regulatory compliance, which ones are being followed. Then next, we look at cloud protection workloads. So deploying services on top of the cloud deployments to then detect, dive into those environments and then build, and then look into them and then create the alerts and incidents coming out of those to then go into your seamless source. Then we look at governance and remediation, so remediating those tasks, remediating those recommendations, but also putting governance in place so that you can automatically assign those tasks to users and also tracking where you are in your environment. And then finally, bringing in a centralized view of all of your clouds. AWS, GCP, and Azure all have their own, cloud technology, security technology, but with Microsoft Defender for Cloud, you can bring it into a central location and see your posture against all environments. So looking at a use case, we had a large service provider who came to us that had no visibility of their cloud environments. They didn't know how large it was. They didn't know, where things were within those clouds because development teams were, the owners of those resources were in fact, managing it themselves. They had no security insights about what posture they were at, whether they were secure, whether they were misconfigured, things like that. The ask of us was to do a cloud review, security review against AWS and Azure, and to bring back prioritized recommendations where return on investment was key. So what did we actually do? We did a discovery using Microsoft Defender for Cloud to see what we could see. We then ran some quick wins, so some of the low-hanging fruit there, so we could deploy, do those quick remediations to improve that posture quite rapidly. And that took about a couple of months to sort of go through that process. We then continued with remediation, and this was doing remediation with the product owners, with the owners of the resources, because making those changes may impact how a service is deployed in those clouds. So we need to work alongside those teams to then help them remediate. We then started with secure from start, so building policy within those cloud environments to stop misconfiguration, stop a resource having being open to the internet by default, so that developers and resource deployment teams aren't accidentally creating misconfigurations in there. And then finally, bringing in protection and monitoring. So bringing in those cloud protective workloads, enabling it so then we can see potential attacks against those services as they happen, rather than waiting for the attack to happen. So what was the outcome? So this organization's posture management went from 20 to 70% in the time that we had with them. That reduced their threats and their risks in that environment and protected their customers, because in effect they were part of the supply chain to their customers. So not just only were we protecting them, we were protecting their customers as well. We allowed for continuous monitoring in their environment. So when new recommendations or new threats come out, it was checked against that. One example of that was the Log4j, being able to detect where that was in that environment and be able to track where you were with the remediation. They had full visibility of the environment in one single place. And this organization had a large subscription, a lot of subscriptions. They had 106 subscriptions, I think it was. And we reduced that by 25% because there was structure there that was legacy, that was not being used anymore. And then we implemented the Secure from Start. So we deployed Azure policy to stop some of the recommendations, some of the misconfiguration from happening, which means that from the future that recommendation never happens anymore. So how do you get started with looking at those threats, looking at being able to discover? So enabling CSPM and getting that visibility, that is always key. You don't know what you don't know. And from Microsoft Defender for Cloud perspective, there is a free tier. There is the foundational CSPM. So deploying it to AWS, GCP, and Azure is just creating the connections, enabling it. Then you get that. You get all the recommendations, misconfigurations, and it's all against the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, which is based on ISO 27001, CIS, and PCI. So you can, from the start, you can get a good idea of where you are. You then got to plan your remediations. So working with teams with the owners to understand which order you do those recommendations in. And then you look at the protective workloads. So once you've done some of the recommendations, you can then start to protect your workloads. Some of them are more complicated than others, but a lot of it is putting onto the services, and then it's doing that extra monitoring. And then, like I said, deploying policy, being able to stop misconfigurations happening in the place, using the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework to add additional controls on the environments. And then finally, looking at governance, building that process on how you review your environments, being able to automate assigning the recommendations to owners within that cloud environment. So how can ITC help? So we can help with the discovery. We can help configure that setup, get you the information you need, build it into that central location, and then help with some of the quick wins and recommendations. We can help support remediation. We can help your teams prioritize the recommendations and identify the risks of what it might impact within your products. We can help deploy the cloud protection workloads. We can identify the benefits, the extra configuration you may need to do with them. We can help baseline your policies for your cloud environments. And we can help with the Microsoft Defender governance, help identify the owners of the resources, ensure that the resources are tagged correctly, and then allow for the automation to take place to add the remediation. So that's it from me. So I hope that's okay.